Is I want to talk about the end of the war in Afghanistan. So I know we've talked a lot about this, but it's important for me to bring this particular story to your attention because it unveils a lot of things about our politics. So, as many of you know, the US ended its war in Afghanistan um, at the end of August. The goal was to have everything done by September 11th, and lo and behold, we actually did hold to that, which is an absolute miracle, if you ask me. But we did do it, and as many of you also know, it was a bit of a rocky end to our 20-year vacation in Afghanistan. Obviously, I'm joking. It was not a vacation. It was terrible and brutal and horrible. But we got out, right? War's over. Yippee skippy, can go back to regular not being at war. Two things on that. First of all, the United States is still at war, actually, just not in Afghanistan. So we have troops in Iraq. We are bombing Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan. We have troops in Niger. So we are still a burgeoning empire, unfortunately. But we did bring back a bunch of troops and a bunch of resources. So in theory, we don't need as much money any longer to fight wars, right? Or so you'd think. However, recently, the United States Congress passed a budget bill for the military. And for anyone who was paying attention, the thought might have gone like this. Well, we're fighting fewer wars now, so we don't need as much money. Therefore, we should reduce the amount of money that we are spending on the military to make way for other projects that we can do at home, or just to save some money because we don't need it anymore, right? Makes sense. Perfectly logical argument. Unfortunately, that's not how things went. In fact, the military budget increased after the troops in Afghanistan came home. Now, you might think to yourself, well, that doesn't make any sense. True, it doesn't. However, the problem is, if you're thinking that way, you don't know the American system very well. So the reason I say this, and I don't mean any offense, is because the American system, especially when it comes to military spending, has actually an incredibly small amount to do with what's actually needed by the US government and the US military. It has more to do with how much profit can be given to quote-unquote defense contractors. I think warmongers is a perfectly good name for them, and I will be using it from now on. But these warmonger corporations, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and Boeing, just to name a few, make lots of money by selling the government things overpriced. And regardless of what the United States does with these items, we still shell out for them. But you see, the war in Afghanistan was fought primarily for, and no one will say this, but was fought primarily to increase the stock portfolios of those people who were invested in defense contractors. And if you look at the long-term stock prices of these companies, they went up. They outperformed the market by incredible amounts. Why? Because no matter what happened, win some, lose some, the war's popular, the war's unpopular, the United States continued to buy more stuff from these warmonger corporations, because we have added a profit motive to war, which is an incredibly bad thing for a whole host of reasons, most of which you can probably imagine without me saying anything. But the most important of which is, as soon as we introduce a profit motive into war, in a capitalist system where profits have to continue to increase, there has to be constant war, or there has to at least be constant war spending. And for the more money we spend and the more of these resources we create, they have to go somewhere. So what ends up happening is either the United States sells these resources or gives these resources away to organizations that, quite frankly, shouldn't have them. So we spend lots of money on these war machines to pay off these warmonger corporations, and they go to places like Israel or Egypt, who have incredibly poor human rights records, or Saudi Arabia, don't even get me started on how bad theirs is. Or we give them to US police departments. And I would say that the human rights record of police departments might actually be worse than that of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt combined. Okay? Which is why, by the way, in the United States, when you saw the Ferguson protests and things, and the DAPL protests and pretty much every major protest, the police has tanks and military gear and they're dressed up like they're in Kandahar because the truth is that's where they got that stuff from. It's called the 1033 program. It is a program in which military equipment and hardware is given to police departments. But anyway, I think I did a segment on that, so I'm going to push it to the side. To get back to the point at hand, the point of US spending on military equipment has never been and is never going to be the actual fighting of wars efficiently and in a manner that actually protects the United States. The biggest mistake we could have possibly made was not heeding the warning of President Eisenhower, who warned us of the military-industrial complex, and essentially, although not directly, warned us of the problems of having a profit motive inside the war machine, because inevitably there will always be pressure on politicians who pay bribes, campaign contributions nominally, to get the military budget to increase over and over and over again, so that the people who hold all the power in these warmongering corporations can continue to make money quarter after quarter and year after year, and in this case, decade after decade. The military-industrial complex is so deep within our zeitgeist, our political zeitgeist. There are jobs related to warmongering in every single state in the Union. So it is easy for a corporation to say, well, if you cut the military budget, you'll be losing jobs in your state. And then once they do that, and if the politician is still brave enough to cut the military budget, then ads will run against them saying they cut good jobs in your state. And look, oftentimes these jobs do pay well. They pay engineers. They're making lots of money. And honestly, we need engineers, but we don't need them for that. In fact, a friend of mine who's more or less like family is an engineer himself, and he was looking for jobs. He wanted to do something in the civil sphere, but literally could not find anything, and ended up working at a warmongering corporation. Now, he himself doesn't like war. He doesn't like the idea of US imperialism or invading other countries, more or less for sport. But the truth is, we have funneled an incredible amount on, we have funneled an incredible amount of resources into the military-industrial complex that we don't even use our good engineers for non-military uses any longer, for the most part. So for people who went to engineering school and paid all this money to be engineers, they end up in a situation where they have to work for a warmonger, because that's how ingrained this all is. Which hopefully explains why, no matter what happens, no matter how many wars we stop fighting, no matter how many troops we bring home, no matter how many people we evacuate from other countries and bring into the US, the defense budget, goodness gracious, even that is propaganda. But the military budget of the United States is never going to decrease. It's never going to go down because we stopped fighting somewhere. There will always be another excuse. There will always be either another war or another engagement or another something that the military-industrial complex and the warmonger corporations and politicians that make it up will find a way to reward the stockholders of these warmonger corporations. Because it was never about defense. It was never about the American people. It was never about America. It always was about making more money for the people at the top of these corporations who are invested in war as their business model. And they have to sell that to someone. And unfortunately, the US government just happens to be the most willing and perhaps the most gullible buyer.